Hello everybody, and welcome to the weekly video cast for subscribers to davidike.com. I've just got back home actually from a couple of days in London where I've been shooting a video which will be available on the website by the end of next week, I hope. And what I did was walk around the streets of London, pointing out the locations where the real power centres are and putting it into a hierarchy of how this whole control system works. And in a city like London, also Washington DC, you can, through just walking the streets and going to these different locations, in London's case, in a very small area, same in Washington's case, really, that's not very big where the power centres are. You can paint the picture of how the whole control system works, and I've done it to present what I hope is an interesting visual picture of how this whole control of the many by the few works, because it's a very simple structure, even though it may appear complex on the surface. Okay, so let's go through the news of the week. Many stories and many different areas to cover, and of course covering them from a different perspective to the one you'd get in the mainstream media. And I want to start with this story, which is about a little boy who had his cannabis oil confiscated when he and his mother entered Britain. And she was pointing out that this cannabis oil was protecting him, a little boy called Billy Caldwell, and his mother Charlotte was saying that this cannabis oil protected him from an incredible number of seizures, up to 100 seizures a day, apparently. And this made no difference to the people at the border. They just said, we're taking it because it's the law. And then soon afterwards, Billy was admitted to hospital with seizures. And of course, this got all into the media. And there was a big reaction to it. And he was then allowed to have the oil under a special license. And I'll just say a little bit more about this, this particular story. And then I want to really open it up, because the medical industry, because that's what it is, controlled by the big pharmaceutical cartel, is a tyranny, and it's becoming more so. And I ask people, what is a greater example of fascism than telling people what they can and cannot put in their own bodies by their personal choice to treat conditions, often conditions that the mainstream of medical science cannot deal with. And we've seen more and more examples of this. And it's an absolute tyranny for reasons I'll come to. So, this is a story from this week. Patients will be allowed to use cannabis oil if panel of doctors agrees. I'll come to that in a minute. An expert panel of doctors is to be given the power to decide whether patients should get a personal license to use medicinal cannabis. England's chief medical officer, Dame Sally Davies, she's appeared in my books before, would lead the group advising the government on applications to prescribe the drugs which are illegal. Home Office Minister Nick Hurd caved in yesterday following widespread outrage over the case of epileptic Billy Caldwell, aged 12, whose illegal supply of cannabis oil was seized by customs officers last week. Billy had relied on the oil to suppress up to 100 seizures a day and had travelled to Canada with his mother, Charlotte, to buy a 6-month supply. But when Miss Caldwell, 50, declared the drug at Heathrow last Monday, it was seized. Without his daily dose, which has kept him free of seizures for 250 days, Billy's health deteriorated rapidly and he was rushed to Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London following a series of potentially fatal fits. And then there's the story with a picture of Billy and his mother leaving the hospital after he was allowed to have this cannabis oil again. And this is the headline: Brave Billy out of danger after taking illegal drug. Laughing jubilantly, Charlotte Caldwell and her son Billy leave hospital yesterday after the Home Secretary let him take. The Home Secretary let him take. I mean, think about that. Who the hell is the Home Secretary, and what the hell does he know about anything to do with treatment? I'll come to that in a minute as well. The Home Secretary let him take illegal cannabis oil to treat his life-threatening seizures. Billy, 12, was discharged from Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, where doctors were bowled over by the effects of the oil, which he needs to suppress up to 100 fits a day. You get the big pharmaceutical cartel to start producing cannabis oil for sale, and suddenly, oh no, cannabis oil's good, yeah, it works. As her son hugged her outside the hospital yesterday, Miss Caldwell said she felt elated. Billy has still to return to the hospital twice a day to receive the oil. So they are staying in a nearby flat paid for by well-wishers. However, questions remain over what will happen with the special 35-day license granted by the Home Secretary. Now, what's this? Billy still has to return to the hospital twice a day to receive the oil. Now just go through this a second. The state takes the oil off the mother who has been giving it to him to treat these seizures and stop these seizures. They take it away. The seizures come back big time after 250 days of being free of them. She kicks up a fuss, and the public reaction caused the government, just as a PR exercise from their point of view, to give this special license that this little boy can have the oil his mother's been giving to him anyway. The seizures stop, but she has to go with him back to the hospital so the hospital can administer the cannabis oil. Wake me up. Do you know, the medical tyranny is just extraordinary. What happens is you've got a pyramid, top of the pyramid, Big Pharma, which makes staggering amounts of money every year by selling drugs overwhelmingly and other forms of treatment, usually to do with the scalpel, because that's everything, isn't it? The scalpel and the drug. If your only tool is a hammer, or at least only two of them, then every problem looks like a nail, and if the problem won't respond to the hammer, then you're sent home to die. No, nothing we can do. No, there is nothing you can do, but maybe there's something others can do and other forms of treatment can do. And here we have a situation where Big Pharma and the products it produces, administered by the medical profession, is one of the biggest causes of death in the Western world, probably further afield as well. And it's because of the effects of the drugs and other forms of treatment that pay no understanding to how the body works. So we see these, we hear this phrase, side effects. Well, there's nothing side about them. They're effects. They're as much effects as the effect they're basing their claims on and reaping their money from. You know, when you go to America and you see these drug adverts, because basically drug adverts pay for American television. And at the end, because they have to give the side effects there, there's this breathless bloody voice reeling off all these side effects, possible side effects of this drug they're selling, after they've given you the sales pitch of the one effect of the drug that they claim is why you should buy it and take it. And they've even started putting pictures on the screen while this breathless voice reels off the side effects to try to grab your attention so you're not hearing what the voice is saying. Yes, it's that cynical. Why is it that cynical? Because the big pharma cartel is pure, undiluted evil. That's why. I mean, we are being told what we should take to make us well by people who make their profits from us being sick. Anybody think there might be a conflict of interest there? I think there might be if you think about it. So we have this big pharma cartel at the top of this so-called health pyramid. And then as you go down the pyramid, you meet all the organizations that administer and control the medical profession, who also are in league with big pharma. And then you come down through the medical profession, who administer the products of big pharma and refuse to look at any other form of treatment, no matter what the background might be on the effects of that treatment on people. And you have a tyranny where basically the medical profession are the agents of the big pharma cartel. Because what the doctors do, because you've got the medical profession ruled by these various doctor bodies, like the American Medical Association, British Medical Association, and many others. And they dictate to doctors the forms of treatment they can and cannot use and administer. And those forms of treatment are those that are coming out of big pharma. So it's an absolute stitch up. And then you come down in this pyramid through these organizations and the doctors, and you get into the politicians and you get into the judges, and they take their policy and their actions and their decisions from what the doctors tell them is the treatment that should be used and these treatments that should never be used. And the doctors have taken their lead from these doctor control organizations who take their lead from big pharma. This is how it works. And so you have situations like in this case, whereby the politicians and through the laws that are passed dictate to the border agents that this must be this cannabis oil must be seized at the border, and the laws have been passed by politicians to make it illegal. And then they take it away from this boy and his mother, causing this medical crisis. And had there not been a massive outcry from the public, that boy might even be dead by now. Why? The treatment was working, and that was never discussed at the border. There was no advice taken on the fact that this treatment is working for this boy. No. The law says it must be seized, so it must be seized. And that law has come from the politicians, which is effectively come out of this big pharma cartel pyramidal hierarchy that I'm talking about. And so through this, doctors have become tyrants who impose upon people what they can and cannot do in terms of treating their own bodies. So we had this other situation recently with a little boy called Alfie Evans, who was terminally ill. The doctors in Britain said there's nothing they can do for him, and the parents wanted to take the boy to Italy for a form of treatment that might have helped him. Not only were they not allowed to do that, it had to go to court, where a judge decided whether Alfie Evans could go to Italy for this treatment or not. And he decided that he couldn't. Now let's think about that. This judge, who knows nothing about medical treatment, makes a decision on the basis of Alfie Evans not being allowed to go to Italy for this treatment. And Alfie then died. And on what judgment, on what basis was that judge making that judgment? On what he was told by doctors who were parroting what they are told is the treatment and not the treatment by the doctor medical hierarchy, who take their lead from Big Pharma. This is how it works. Big Pharma dominate the medical schools. And therefore the medical schools are teaching doctors only basically Big Pharma methods of treatment. And then there was this other story, actually not far from me, just across the water from the Isle of Wight. And this was a little boy again called Aisha King. Now, he was being treated for a tumour, a brain tumour, in Southampton Hospital. The parents were not happy with how it was going. And so they took him out of the hospital, actually had to do it secretly, surreptitiously, because the doctors would not have allowed him out, because they wanted to take him into Europe to get a particularly, what would appear to be far more effective form of treatment for this condition. When the parents with the boy headed into Europe to another hospital, medical centre for this treatment, the doctors and the administrators at Southampton Hospital contacted the police, and there was this European, what they call manhunt for this couple. And eventually they are tracked down, and they spend 72 hours in jail for taking their own child for this treatment, which would have appeared to them to be far more effective than the way it was going in Southampton. And this is a story about the current outcome. This is a story from February this year, and its headline is "Amazing Recovery of Aisha King 4 years after parents took brain tumour sufferer abroad for specialist treatment." A young boy with a brain tumour whose parents sparked a Europe-wide manhunt when they whisked him away from hospital has shown the remarkable recovery he's making. Aisha King revealed that he enjoys riding his bike, playing Lego, watching films, etc. He was just 5 when his parents, Brett and Nagema, removed him from the ward at Southampton Hospital because they wanted him to have proton therapy in 2014. The Kings were found in Spain a week later and the mum and dad arrested. Later that year, the High Court ruled that Aisha, the High Court again, another frickin' judge, should go to Prague for the proton treatment. And last year, Mr. King from Hampshire told how he was at school and cancer free. And again, what is a judge, even though he made what people might call the right decision there, in this case, eventually, what is a judge doing ruling over whether parents can take their child with a brain tumour for a form of treatment that has clearly, up to this point, been very effective? Because the whole medical profession and the big pharma cartel is all part of this this hierarchy of control, right down here to control of what you can and cannot put into your own body. And we've had many examples, especially in America, of parents who've actually questioned a doctor's opinion about their child in terms of either what they have, the diagnosis, or the treatment. And they've asked for a second opinion. Now, if your child was very ill, you'd want to look in great detail at every area of the situation so you ensure that the very best is being done for the child. Of course you do. But here are parents who are asking for a second opinion because they're not happy about the first doctor. And then the doctor is contacting social services, and these parents are having their child taken away from them. This is happening. I don't say that this medical hierarchy is a tyranny just to throw the line away or throw the word away. It's because it is. And at the same time, again, to benefit Big Pharma and its bottom line, you're having government agencies targeting, not least the European Union, targeting alternative methods of treatment outside of the Big Pharma cartel. And you have a situation where I've just mentioned about the advertisements on American television where you've got all these long list of side effects. But basically, Big Pharma can say, in effect, what it bloody likes. Take this drug, it will do this. But in the alternative arena, where they're using treatments that have none of those side effects, the law has now reached the point of targeting complementary medicine, as it's called, where they cannot tell you what something will do, even though there may be mainstream scientific studies to show that it does what they say it does, or would say it does if they could. And these government agencies are on the case of alternative practitioners all the time, because the plan is to shut it down and only have big pharma medicine and nothing else. Because what was happening, of course, is the figures showed ever vaster numbers of people were turning to alternative methods of treatment because they were sick, well, literally, of the mainstream medical profession and of the big pharma cartel. And I mentioned there in relation to this cannabis oil case, and by the way, I know people who've taken cannabis oil who were sent home to die of cancer and then became cancer free. Now, I'm not saying, take cannabis oil and your cancer will go. I'm saying that I know people who've taken cannabis oil when they were given very little time to live, who are still alive years later. And how many people are dying who do not need to die? How many people are suffering from ongoing medical conditions that don't need to suffer? But these things are happening because their choice is taken away, and basically you've got the scalpel or the drug. Which benefits who? Big Pharma. Big Pharma that gives massive payment incentives, if not direct with money, though that happens, my goodness, but holidays abroad at conferences that people never have to attend, and research grants where no research is ever done. Documented all this in the books. And they bought the medical profession. And so you have a situation, and it goes deeper than this, because there is this attack on the human immune system I've talked about in the books, and this attack on human health, because, a sharp, healthy population, mentally and physically, is not as easy to control as one that isn't. And so, of course, one of the things that we've had increasingly is this epidemic of addiction and consequences for psychiatric drugs that pour out of big pharma and frazzle the minds of people. We have a situation where what is good for you and what is bad for you is turned on its head. I mentioned in a public video cast recently, we've had this whole nonsense that cholesterol is bad for you, so you must lower your cholesterol. I quoted a book in that video about 101 mainstream scientific studies that actually showed the opposite was the case. And if you have low cholesterol, you're more likely to die than if you have high cholesterol, for reasons I explained in that video. Cholesterol, for instance, is absolutely vital, central to the body synthesizing sunlight into vitamin D. And if you have a vitamin D deficiency, which you will have if you have low cholesterol, then there's a whole raft of different diseases and conditions that you will suffer from. In fact, there was a story this week in the news about vitamin D, where I'll give you the headline. Studies based on 3 continents show higher than recommended doses of vitamin D prevent cancer. Research utilizing combined data from 17 studies, including more than 12,000 people from the US, Europe, and Asia, found that optimal levels of vitamin D for colon cancer prevention are higher than the current US recommendation of 600 international units per day. In the absence of vitamin D from sunlight, disease increases more than 1,000%. Experts suggest that the chances of getting vitamin D from your diet are very low, and even lower if you have low cholesterol and you're not synthesizing sunlight into vitamin D. Humans make 90% of our vitamin D naturally from sunlight, 90% from sunlight exposure to the skin. Specifically from ultraviolet B exposure to the skin, which naturally initiates the conversion, wait for it, of cholesterol in the skin to vitamin D3. Theories linking vitamin D deficiency to certain cancers have been tested and confirmed in more than 200 studies. An understanding of its physiological basis stems from more than 2,500 laboratory studies, according to this Dr. Cedric Garland, professor of family and preventative medicine at San Diego School of Medicine. This is the number, he said, this is the number one chemopreventive substance on the planet, and it's natural and without side effects. So what you have is a hidden hand that knows the effects of low cholesterol on vitamin D alone, and there are many other effects of low cholesterol. And so they put out that cholesterol's bad for you and you have to lower it. And one of the ways that you do it, more and more people are taking them, you take statins to lower your cholesterol, which is produced by Big Pharma. And your cholesterol falls and your health goes haywire, including, by the way, many of these studies into the effects of low cholesterol have shown that there's a higher prevalence of suicide and psychological problems and depression if you have low cholesterol. Why? Because a vast part of the brain is cholesterol. So it's all a scam. But because they tell you from the top of this hierarchical pyramid that cholesterol's bad for you, so it comes down through these doctor administrating controlling organizations into the medical profession, and so you go to the doctor and they say, oh, your cholesterol's high, that's bad for you. This book of these studies was saying how people go to the doctor with bad health, and the doctor says, oh, well, your health's not good, but oh, some good news, you've got low cholesterol. And of course, doctors are basically pharmacists. There are some good ones, but mainly they're pharmacists. They're just administering the treatment. You know, I haven't been to a doctor for ages, but when you go, there was one, he's not practicing anymore, but you would go in, this is like decades ago, that I went to this guy occasionally, and you tell him what was wrong with you, and before you'd finished the sentence, basically, he turned and he was looking at his computer, and he was tapping into his computer your symptoms and getting the frickin' drug up. And we got to stop being imposed upon like this. I mean, you know, this last few days, the government's announced it's going to spend a great deal more on the British National Health Service. It will end up in the hands and pockets of corporations because they're trying to sell off the National Health Service So it's not a state organization, it's a corporate organization. But the point is that when you look at the figures of the effect of drugs, negative effect of drugs, and you look at the effect on people's health of the crap in food and drink, and this increasingly vehement, lethal, cumulatively, sea of technologically generated radiation that we live in, not least Wi-Fi, but so much else. You put all that lot together, and it doesn't matter how much money you put into health, illness will always outstrip the funding, because you've basically got a tap that is running faster and faster and faster in terms of the causes of ill health. And like I say, one of them is the frickin' treatment. And so, and I see this on the left in politics. We must spend more on the health service. Well, I have another question. Why are so many people ill? And how can we stop that happening? Because the idea surely should not be focused entirely on the treatment when the horse is bolted, but actually stopping the treatment being necessary because the person doesn't get ill. And people don't get ill on anything like the same scale they do now, mentally or physically. But to do that, you've got to take on Big Pharma and the effects of its products in devastating health and killing vast numbers of people every year. And they're only the ones reported on the death certificate or the diagnosis to have been generated by Big Pharma products. Most of the effects never get there. It's written off as something else. If we knew the full scale of the number of people that are killed and maimed every year because of Big Pharma products administered by doctors, it would be absolutely shocking and by far and away the biggest cause of death on planet Earth. But to do the sensible thing, which is say, how do we stop people getting ill on the same scale? You have to take on Big Pharma. You have to take on the food corporations, the drink corporations. You have to take on the Wi-Fi, the phone and telecommunications industry. Anybody think the politicians are going to do that? No. Because where do the politicians get their information from about health and the effects of Wi-Fi and the effects of smartphones, the effects of what's in food and drink? They get it from the same medical hierarchy, atop of which sits Big Pharma and these other industry lobby groups. We've had studies recently pointing out a massive increase in brain tumours, not least among children. But they say, we don't know why. Well, take that phone from your ear, mate, and I'll explain. It's obvious what's causing it, but to stop the cause, you have to deal with the whole telecommunications industry, the frequencies on which these phones operate, and they ain't going to do that. Because dead people and people who suffer from the horrific effects of brain tumours, they are less important than what's best for the industry, what's best for the system, and ultimately what's best for the hidden hand that's driving all this. And of course, now they're planning to bring in 5G, which, compared even with what's gone before, is going to be devastating to human health, both physically and psychologically and emotionally, as I pointed out in the books and in a video cast not too long ago. So that's where we are. And another story, just to finish off this whole area. I've just seen this today. Richard Branson's Virgin private health firm wins £2 million in taxpayer cash after suing the National Health Service for serious flaws when they lost an £82 million contract to provide children's medical services. Because Richard Branson, who claims to be this so-called progressive man of the people, is total frickin' fraud. And when he tenders for government contracts and he don't get them, he gets so many. When he don't get them, he throws his toys out of the pram, and he's done so here. Richard Branson's health firm has pocketed £2 million of public money by suing the National Health Service. Virgin Care, is that a contradiction in terms? I'm not sure. Took high court action after losing out on an £82 million contract to provide children's medical services in Surrey. The work was handed to a rival group of in-house NHS providers and a social enterprise firm last year. Virgin Care claimed there were serious flaws in the procurement process and secured an out-of-court settlement in November. Newly released accounts show that 6 clinical commissioning groups and National Health Service England paid Virgin Care £1,565,000. Surrey County Council handed over another £440,000, and at least £243,000 more was diverted from frontline NHS services to cover legal fees. So Richard, this is another line just above that one, which is very telling, goes back to what I said earlier. Virgin Care won £1 billion pounds of NHS contracts in 2016-2017 as 3.1 billion of health services were privatised. Just have a cup of tea. There we go. Like I say, the National Health Service is being privatised, and this money that's been announced by the government, we're going to spend all this money, which we'll get by coming out of the EU, that a lot of it will go into the pockets of these corporations. Story goes on. Sir Richard's company has more than 400 NHS contracts, including GP practices, sexual health clinics, and John Ashworth, Labour Party health spokesman, said constant tendering, procuring and contracting out of services waste taxpayers' money. By taking this legal action, the NHS is forced to pay out again instead of putting that money into patient care. Well, yeah, that's because, Branson's a frickin' fraud. But put money into patient care? Why don't we, for goodness sake, look at how we can stop people becoming ill? Why? Because the system doesn't want it. Okay, so that's the first story today. I've gone on a bit about that, but it's an important area, I suggest, in terms of the way the land is going, or the way the direction is going, of more and more tyranny coming out of the medical profession. Okay, so let's